In 1795, there's a teenager named Daniel McGinnis, and he was roaming Oak Island. It's just off the coast of Nova Scotia, and he came across something very odd. This is the island. This is Oak Island, and here's a young Daniel McGinnis, and he was wandering around, along on the island, and he noticed there was like a depression, like a circular indentation in the ground, and he thought it was kind of odd, and he kind of scuffed around in the dirt a little bit, and it felt like there was something solid underneath, something weird. So he was like, okay, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go get my boys. We're going to come over here with some shovels, and we're going to start digging. We're going to see what's underneath here. And there's actually the circle right there where he found, and that's the Oak Island Pit. The Oak Island Pit. Well, on further investigation, McGinnis and his friends John Smith and Anthony Vaughn found something that surprised them. They dug the surface 2 feet deeper and found a layer of flagstone. They further dug the surface for 30 feet, and they found a myriad of layers of oak logs, which was equal to the length of the pit. Oak logs buried in the ground. No one knows what it's for. It's kind of odd. Well, they didn't get too much further. They found some weird like artifacts. They saw like some coins that they were interested. Like, what on earth is going on here? This is buried treasure. There's got to be buried treasure in there. Someone dug this and put up protective layers. So in 1804, the Onslow Company, they were an organized treasure hunting company. They continued digging and found more wooden platforms and charcoal, putty, and coconut fibers deep in the ground. Exotic materials that should not have been on the island, which caused more intrigue, more mystery. But they noticed something odd. When they dug, they encountered flooding. At about 90 feet, the pit flooded with water, halting the progress, and they tried to remove the water, and it failed. Marked the beginning of the recurring flooding problem that would plague future digs. It didn't end with them, because in 1849, that was in 1804, again, started off in 1795, 1804, then in 1849, the Truro Company organized another treasure hunt. They drilled into the pit and found evidence of a treasure chest or metal objects in a layer of soft material. They claimed they brought up pieces of gold, like chain and parchment, though it's kind of debated on whether they actually did or not. And like the Onslow Company, they couldn't continue because they kept dealing with this flood because they discovered this seems to be booby-trapped. The further you get down, the more it floods. The more you mess with it, the more it resets your progress, and you have to start all over again. Fast forward to 1861, the Oak Island Association, they tried to explore it again. But tragically, a boiler explosion during the expedition led to the first recorded death in the Oak Island treasure hunt. They found more evidence of flood tunnels, which appeared to be deliberately designed to prevent digging on the site. In 1897, William Chappell and Frederick Blair, they led a team to explore, and a drill brought up a piece of what appeared to be parchment with letters, possibly a V or an I written on it. And they believed they were nearing like a vault because there were these like symbols that they couldn't decipher. But you guessed it, flooding occurred again, and it halted their progress. Fast forward to 1909, the Old Gold Salvage Group, including none other than Franklin D. Roosevelt. Franklin D. Roosevelt. They began another search, and the expedition revealed little new material, but remained Roosevelt's lifelong interest in the mystery of Oak Island. He wanted to know what was going on. And the flooding, like others, it occurred again. 1930s, Gilbert Hedden and Fred Blair, they started digging, and guess what? They encountered more flooding. In the 1960s, Robert Dunfield, and he got pretty far, but guess what happened? Flooding yet again. In the 1970s through the 1990s, the Triton Alliance, they tried, and they found some tools, but they couldn't access anything because, you guessed it, flooding. 1995 to 2005, the Dan Blankenship continues, and they failed. 2014 to present day, they still are trying to dig, and they're still flooding. Despite all our modern technology, despite trying to get whatever's in there out, they're failing. So despite over 225 years of effort and $10 to $20 million later, the Oak Island Money Pit continues to be an unsolved mystery. 225 years, human beings have been trying to dig in there and figure out what it is. So much, they've invested time, they've invested money, they've invested human lives, and it remains a futile effort. I want to talk about trees. So trees are pretty fascinating because I'm sure we all know how they work. There's a graph if you don't. But you know what the tree does? It sends its nutrients and its energy to its branches, to its fruit. It takes up the nutrients and it gives them out. And you know what happens? That fruit falls off. But you know what happens after that? The seeds get in the ground and then more life is created. See, the more you put out, the more you get. The more life is created. Whereas the oak tree island pit, the more that they put in, the less and less they got out of it. It was a bottomless pit. The more a tree gives nutrients to its branches, the more life can be created. The more it gives, the more it replicates. The pursuit of the pit and the cycle of life for trees are opposite. The more you expend into the pit, the more loss and destruction takes place. And paradoxically, the more a tree expends in its branches, the more life is created. I think we are like the money pit. I think on a deep level, we're like that Oak Island pit. We're constantly in need of attention, of validation, of love, of acceptance, of people agreeing with us, but it's a black hole. You never reach a point where it's like, okay, I've had enough love. No one loves me anymore. No, I've had enough attention. No more for me, thanks. I'm good. It's a bottomless pit. In fact, the Kohelet, the teacher in Ecclesiastes, tells us the same thing, that it's empty. It's empty. There's nothing there. The more you dig, the more you invest, the less you get out of it. And in fact, the more we live for gratifying those desires, of filling that abyss, the more we destroy and exhaust others in our wake. We wrap them up into our vortex. Is that just the way things are going to be for the rest of our lives? And I'm sure all of us recognize that we need love, we need attention, we need acceptance. But it's never enough. Is that how God intended for us to be? Well, Jesus changed the definition of what it means to be human. Love. There's the answer. Love. Jesus said the greatest commandment, that you love God and that you love your neighbor as yourself. So love as defined by Jesus teaches the exact opposite. And love is a terrible, terrible word because I love this fan. I love Taco Bell, specifically their nacho fries. I love Hannah. I love my dog. And I'm in trouble if all those things are on the same scale, right? Same word is used, but completely different levels. Love is a terrible, terrible word because love, we think of love as a feeling, and feeling is a part of what true love is, or agape love, as the Bible defines it. Love as taught by Jesus is an action. In Romans 5:8, Paul says, but God shows his love for us, and that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. So what does love mean to God? What does love mean to Jesus? That he so loved you, there's an action. That he sent his son. In Galatians 2:20, Paul says, I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me, and what? And gave himself for me. See, love is an action. Love is not a bottomless pit. The more love you give, it doesn't waste it. It doesn't drain it. When we are filled with love, we're a tree. We give of ourselves, and we create life. Paul had a lot to say about love, specifically to a church community in Corinth that was kind of messing up the whole point of being a Christian. They kind of just butchered it horrendously. They were leaving people out, the poor people. They didn't have any communion because the rich people were eating it all. In fact, they were consuming so much that they were getting drunk, they were getting full, and that they were going away. The poor people, they didn't have anything. And Paul's like, that's the opposite point of Jesus. The whole point of Jesus is establishing a family of unity, and you're making separation. And Christ came to unite us as children under God. And so he knew he had to fix the root of the issue with these people, and it was love. He needed to adjust their understanding, remind them of what true love is. So we're going to read 1 Corinthians 13. Paul writes, if I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. Hannah knows all about that from the drum set in my basement. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give away all I have, and if I deliver up my body to be burned, but have not love, I gain nothing. Think about that. Even if you sacrifice your own life for someone else, it's not out of love. It's nothing. It's useless. Love is patient. and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. As for prophecies, they will pass away. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when the perfect comes, the partial will pass away. When completeness comes. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up childish ways. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I have been fully known. So now faith, hope, and love abide, these three, but the greatest of these is love. Our instinctual nature is to be a bottomless pit. We demand others to invest everything into our wants, our desires, and that ends up draining and destroying those around us. I mean, think about it. We've created a mess when we really think about the way we treat each other and what we do to each other and the thoughts that we think about each other in secret. That, guess what? That does affect your actions to one degree or another. And that's just a reality. Like, we can't pretend, this is us yesterday. This is probably us this morning at some point, that there's been some unloving thought that has popped in our minds. Love is the opposite of this demanding and absorbing and putting into me, right? Filling my abyss. Love is a tree that invests in others and creates a constant cycle of life. So we're going to look at these very quickly. One, love is patient. In other words, love has time to give. You don't force others to operate under your timeline. And, you think about it, how frustrated do you get at a restaurant when it feels like you're waiting forever and ever for your food? It's a pretty frustrating experience. And trust me, I've been on the receiving end of that, working at Chick-fil-A. People get very hangry. They get very mad very quick. They're not very patient when they're hungry. But it doesn't matter what's going on in our circumstances. Love has time to give. I have time to be patient because I love you. I'm not going to force you. I want you to be at this point of growth on my timetable. I want you to be this mature now. How patient has God been with us? How patient should we be with each other? Not a fraction of how patient God has been with us. We can afford it. Paul says love is kind. And I love the Greek word. It means pleasant. Love is pleasant. When you hang out with people, when people encounter you, your family, your spouse, your coworkers, your friends, what do they experience? How would they describe their experience? If they were to leave a Google review, right, like a Yelp review on hanging out with Logan, would they say it was pleasant? Or would they say, man, he was a jerk. He only wanted to talk about himself. He kept talking about Led Zeppelin. He wouldn't shut up about it. He was only interested in what he had to say. When we engage in correction of our brothers or sisters, what's the spirit of our words? What's the motivations behind it? In 2 Timothy 2:24, Paul tells Timothy, and the Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, but kind to everyone, able to teach, patiently enduring evil. Even if it's evil, we're supposed to be patient. Correcting his opponents with gentleness. God may perhaps grant them repentance leading to a knowledge of the truth. I'll just brag on my dad for a quick second. Don't tell him. Please do not tell him I said this. But I've had folks tell me, he's an elder at East End. I've had folks tell me, when your dad gets on to me, I don't feel deflated. Even when he gets on to me for something, I feel built up afterward. He makes me want to do better. Is that how people feel when we correct them, when we reprove them? Do we make them feel this small, or do we make them feel, you're better than that? You can be better than that. What's the spirit of our words? Paul goes on, love is not jealous. Jealousy or envy is when you see something positive happening for someone else and you feel like you've been personally wronged. You feel like it was out of your pocket that good thing happened. What love allows us to do is to celebrate someone's good fortune as if it were our own. In Romans 12:15, Paul says, rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. If you are a money pit, if you're that Oak Island pit, good news for someone else just causes you to highlight all the things that you don't have or that you didn't get. Envy, if you ever think it's not a big deal, envy is what caused Cain to slay his brother. It's what caused Joseph's brothers to sell him into slavery. And it's what put Jesus on the cross. Remember, it was out of envy that the Jews delivered him up. It's a serious thing. If we think we're beyond that, come on. You're being dishonest with yourself. I love this quote from Clark's commentary. Many persons cover a spirit of envy and uncharitableness with the name of godly zeal and tender concern for the salvation of others. They find fault with all. Their spirit is a spirit of universal censoriousness. None can please them, and everyone suffers by them. These destroy more souls by tithing mint and cumin than others do by neglecting the weightier matters of the law. Such persons have what is termed, and very properly too, sour godliness. So even a form of godliness, it can really be rooted in jealousy and envy. That making you feel wrong or putting everyone else in this bracket of you're wrong makes me feel elevated because I don't like the way I feel about myself. And I want to be above you because I'm jealous. Paul says love does not brag. It is not arrogant or rude. What motivates a state of arrogance and rudeness? You think you're better than other people. That's the root of it. You think you're better than other people. I think this is manifested in only being interested in what you have to say, not knowing what's going on in other people's lives. And these are the attitudes that turn the focus on our abyss, right? Hey, focus on this abyss. Focus on this bottomless pit that just wastes your time, your energy, and drains you and drowns you in the vortex of my own misery. Me, and it will never be filled. Abraham Lincoln was talking about the Southerners. It's debated what were the circumstances that he said this. But he said they are just what we would be under similar circumstances. If you ever think you're better than someone else, when I was in the prisons, it's easy for me to be like, at least I'm not here. I've never done anything that bad to be in prison like this. But then you hear their stories. I would have been right there in that prison if I had their upbringing. If I underwent the same circumstances, horror stories, I can't even repeat them from the pulpit. But if I underwent what they underwent, I'd be the same way. So don't you be ever thinking you're better than anybody. Love does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. And so these are negative examples. Paul gives 8 negative examples that are kind of tied to one another. And these negative examples illustrate one who consistently prioritizes their own wants, needs, and feelings over others. In Philippians 2:4, Paul writes, let each of you look not only to his own interests. There are times when you do need to look to your own interest. If you have a broken arm and someone says, hey, you want to have a coffee? You might say, well, let me get my arm fixed first, and then we'll go get coffee. You need to prioritize that. But that's not where it stops. You also, as Paul says, but also the interest of others, right? You uplift their needs. We get angry. What's the root of anger? Well, it's when we feel that something we value is threatened or offended, right? If someone scratches your brand new car, you're angry. Why? Because they hurt something you value. If someone harms your child, you're angry. Why? Because they've hurt something you care about, you prioritize. What is offense when people say things about you? Well, you value yourself, and so that causes anger because you've been offended. You feel you've been wronged. We get angry when someone disagrees with our opinion because we value our opinion. And so it's a personal affront when you disagree with my opinion because you're attacking me because I value myself. See, anger is a reactive emotion. If we are acting as human money pits, the highest value is ourselves. Others have to walk on eggshells around us. They are constantly in fear of offending our opinions, rejecting our desires, and we end up absorbing them, again, as I said, into the vortex of our own misery. When our highest value is ourselves, we keep a record of everyone who wrongs us. Do you remember what your spouse said last week that really made you mad? If you get in a fight, well, you did this. Is that what pops up? I tell you, love requires a short memory because thank God that he has a short memory with us. He's very patient. He doesn't keep a tally of you did this, or your sins are washed away or white as snow. That's the kind of love that God has provided for us. Love does not rejoice in wrongdoing. You may think, well, yeah, I don't rejoice when an earthquake happens or something. Boom, they're got that one covered. Maybe I failed in the rest of them, but at least I got that one. Ha ha, Paul got you. Here's what I believe he means at least. I think we're all offended when we see people act wickedly, right? When people behave poorly, when someone blows up at work, it's oh, that's bad, that's offensive, I don't like that. But we rejoice in our own wrongdoing because we keep doing it. If we didn't rejoice in it, we wouldn't keep doing it. So what's the solution? Love rejoices in the truth. Following Jesus is a pursuit of inconvenience. The moment we think we have spiritually made it, like, oh man, yep, I got it. I got that love thing covered. I'm doing all that right now. That's the moment you stop following Jesus. Because we instead rejoice in the truth of who and what we are. That's a work in progress. I love that song, He's Still Working on Me. It's what all of our mentalities need to be. I'm in a constant pursuit of growth. I'm in a constant pursuit of perfection. Until you've obtained that perfection, following Jesus means allowing and rejoicing in the truth that sheds light into our abyss, into that nasty side that we always try to keep covered, but manifests itself in all sorts of ways, in sin and selfishness, that bottomless pit. Jesus' truth shines light about who we are, about our flaws, about our vulnerabilities. And the truth of Jesus' love is that he makes us vulnerable, and that vulnerability is not a cause for denial or despair. We don't say, oh, no, I'm not like that. I can't be like that. No, Jesus wants you to see that, and he doesn't want you to despair about that either. It's through that very acknowledgement that I'm flawed, that I've sinned, that leads us to hope through the new way of life through the Spirit. As Paul says in Romans 8, those who are in the flesh cannot please God. But if Christ is in you, although the body is dead because of sin, the Spirit is life because of righteousness. If the Spirit of him who raised Jesus from the dead dwells in you, he who raised Christ Jesus from the dead will also give life to your mortal bodies through his Spirit who dwells in you. When you think that ugly, unloving thought, you don't sit there and beat yourself. You listen to God speaking to you, right? Hey, don't do that. Don't do that. That's ugly. And you say, yes, it is. I'm repenting of that. I'm changing. I'm changing my thought pattern. See, it's a training. That's what Paul talks about, training in righteousness. It's a constant discipline. Paul says love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Oh, why do you have to say all things? I can do some things, some of the time. All things. The bears, it's to cover. And if you're familiar, to cover is the word for atonement. For atonement, that we atone for one another. Do we get more pleasure out of exposing flaws than covering them? Do we enjoy when someone does something embarrassing? Do we like pointing that out? Ha ha, you messed up. Ha ha, you did that. Or do we try to cover them, right? Like Adam and Eve, when they were naked and aware of it, and it was their own fault, what did God do? He covered their shame. Are we people who cover each other's shame? That we don't rejoice when someone, even if we're, as Brother Sandusky would always say, human chiggers, they like get under your skin. Even them, do we cover their embarrassment? Do we cover for them? Because Peter tells us that love covers a multitude of sins. We never believe something we know to be a lie. When he says love believes all things. We never assume evil over good, is I believe what he's saying. Without objective facts and like a multiplicity of witnesses, as Scripture clearly teaches, we assume good. In all things, take the charitable position. I remember one time at Chick-fil-A, this lady was being horribly nasty to me. I mean, just curt, said something just super insulting to me, and I just said, I'm sorry. And she said, I'm sorry. I'm having a terrible day. My mom passed away. We're trying to figure out how to sell her car. We don't know what to do with it. We're having trouble with the bank. And she's just having a bad day. You don't know what people are going through. You may be encountering someone at the worst day of their life, and you may have no clue. So take the charitable position. Love hopes all things. This is from Guzik. I love this comment. Love hopes all things. Love has confidence in the future, not pessimism. When hurt, it does not say it will be this way forever and even get worse. It hopes for the best, and it hopes in God. That's what true love does. To endure all things, we must have a strong resilience to poor treatment. To endure all things, we have to have a strong resilience to poor treatment. As the Hebrew author says in 12:3, consider him who endured from who? From people who liked him and treated him wrong on occasion or said something mean every now and again. From sinners, who endured from sinners such hostility against himself. Why? So that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. Jesus serves as the great high priest because he endured that, and he did it so patiently. He endured it so much it killed him. That's how far he endured that hostility. So we can bear when someone steps on our toes a little bit. We can stand if someone cuts us off in traffic. We can endure that. We'll be okay. And so my question for you this morning is our existence, are we living as that abyss that just constantly needs, wants, me? Or are we like a tree that just gives? The more we give, the more life is created. The more we give of ourselves, in other words, the more truly human we become. The more that we give of ourselves. Because that's the ultimate way to be human. That is humanity as God designed. And we see that lived through the life of Jesus. In 1 John chapter 3, it says, "See what kind of love the Father has given to us, that we should be called children of God. And so we are. The reason why the world does not know us is that it did not know him. Beloved, we are God's children now, and what we will be has not yet appeared, but we know that when he appears, we shall be like him, because we shall see him as he is." If you don't want to be a child of destruction that just wraps other people into that meaningless void, that void that we all try to fill through different pleasures, through different desires, and we just think, if I only consume enough of this, I'll be full. You won't. Jesus said, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied." That's the only way to find true satisfaction, is through this act of self-sacrifice. And the ultimate way to do that is by imitating Jesus and dying to yourself, and dying to who you thought you wanted to be, to your envision of the good life, by loving God. In Romans 6:4, Paul says, "We were buried, therefore, with him by baptism into death." Paradoxical, right? You want to have life? Die. What? Just like a tree. How does it propagate? It's through really this death process, this giving, the shedding, and then new life is created. He says, "In order that just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, we too might walk in newness of life. For if we have been united with him in a death like his, we shall certainly be united with him in a resurrection like his." If you want to have part in the resurrection, if you want to be a child of God, if you want to have the fellowship that Brother Matt spoke about this morning, this communion with one another and with God, and for the new life in the Spirit, we ask that you come forward, be baptized as we stand and sing number 386.